Welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I'm Stacy. That's
And I'm
EJ.
EJ.
And we're a little out of it this morning, but we're going to have some fun talking about a very interesting topic. Let her rip.
Motherese. That's what we're
Yeah.
talking about today. Motherese.
So, colloquially, this is known as Motherese, but it is also referred to as child directed speech. So, it's basically how do you talk to kids? Like there's a way that we talk to kids, at least in certain cultures. Not every culture has a form of child directed speech. That is to be noted first and foremost. But there is a specific way that some cultures will modify their speech when they're speaking to a child.
Well, I think there's probably a couple of distinctions here because there's a couple different types of motherese, I would say. Like
Yeah.
there's when you use reduplication is a really big one, where you're just like repeating syllables, like you might say mama instead of mom, or I think sometimes it comes from copying back how a child is actually saying something to you.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the change in pitch,
Yes.
which I believe is actually relatively universal. And there's studies that show that it actually also helps children understand when you do that. But I think one of my professors when I was in college mentioned that like there's been studies trying to, because people say like, oh, I don't do that. But even
Mm-hmm.
people who try not to modify their pitch at all when talking to children still do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. It's very true. It's just kind of like a natural tendency, and it'll happen with things that you think are like cute as well, right? Like there's a lot of things that will kind of like change our base pitch, and where we are directing our speech will change our pitch. And that's not just for like children. That's kind of just like across the board. You will kind
Oh
of
yeah.
adjust your pitch or tonality based on who or what it is you're talking to.
That's actually one of the reasons why I always want our podcast to be unscripted, is because I hate the tone that people take when you can tell they're just reading something. Like people
I
take on a
agree.
reading tone
Yes.
and it bothers me.
Oh, I 100% agree. Like when I go to conferences and stuff and you can tell they're just reading off their PowerPoints. Oh, it's so much worse than when they're like talking about the PowerPoints rather than just reading the PowerPoint. Reading out loud and speaking are two very different phenomenon, and we structure our language differently based on whether we're reading or we're just like speaking casually. But yeah, so we automatically like adjust our pitch to the scenario that it is we're working with. When we talk a little bit more about like gendered language and stuff, and like the difference between genders and how they do speech, pitch is also another one of those things. It's not just like a biological factor, but when communicating with opposite genders, there is often pitch changes as well. So pitch change is like probably the most obvious for Motherese, for child directed speech. But
Mm-hmm.
in conjunction, if we're talking about like phonetic changes and shifts in child directed speech, you get these pitch changes. You go into a higher pitch, a higher register. That's a little bit easier to detect. I think that's like the theory behind it, is like the higher the register, the more like contrastive some of your sounds may be. And then you phonetically, you also tend to exaggerate your sounds more as well. So your vowels become more exaggerated, mama and e and daddy, right? You exaggerate these vowels and you maybe harden up some of your consonants in order to show clarity, right? Because when you're speaking to a child, there's just something kind of like built into us that's like okay, this thing doesn't quite know language yet, so you gotta kind of help them out. And so you gotta, they're not quite programmed with all of the little nuances that go with distinguishing certain sounds and everything. And so they're building on that. And so by exaggerating some of your speech, it's supposedly to help them perceive it, whether like visually or auditorily is the word I'm looking for, help them to kind of perceive it better, and understand what
Yeah.
you're hearing and hear some of those contrasts.
Yeah, and there's been lots of different studies about Motherese and both like how it's, generated. Like I just Googled, Motherese study, and you get like Princeton University has an article called Uncovering the Sound of Motherese Baby Talk Across Languages.
Mm-hmm.
And in this study, they took mothers from or women who speak 10 different languages, including English. And they found it across all of them that all of the women are using Motherese. And this specific study didn't do it with men, but they've done it with men as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also been studies about do these natural changes in the way that we speak to children, like maybe just to pitch specifically, does that impact the child's understanding and actually help them understand? And they found that like speaking Motherese, at least some aspects of it, there's probably parts of it that don't, but does actually help a child, hear and understand what you're saying, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, especially when we're talking about like exaggerated like articulation in the mouth, people underestimate how visual children are. There's a reason that their first words are usually mama, is because the end sound is very visually apparent. Like the closure of the lips is so very obvious, whereas the sound, like the R sound, K sound, the like those sounds are often not picked up until later in life, because those need to be perceived auditorially, because you can't see what your tongue is doing. So they'll like kind of guess and they'll fuddle around with it until they find the consonant. And if they don't, then we have wonderful speech language pathologists who can help with that.
Right. And there's a lot of theories around like that kind of exploration and the way that children find sounds and stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, children are, to be like transparent with our audience, children are still a big mystery linguistically.
Humans and language are a
Humans
big
and language are still
mystery.
a big mystery. But I mean, it's kind of hard to do studies on kids just because kids and ethics and getting parents to cooperate with scientists, and children don't have a way of communicating about what's going on inside of their heads, unlike grown-ups, and so it's just more difficult to study them,
especially in that initial phase that is really like so vital in the learning of language. It's a little bit of like a paradox of like, until you learn language and you've passed that phase to be able to express yourself, you can't express yourself, and therefore it's hard to study what's actually happening.
Yeah, that like 0 to 2 is insane in terms of like the amount of growth that happens within a child. Like anyone who's seen 0 to 2 kids know that they grow extremely fast, both physically and cognitively. Like they go from being absolutely, marveled at everything to are usually around 2 years old. They're pretty decent communicators, and they can say like yes and no and I want and I have and mine and this and that, right? So that whole process is we have it well documented, but it's still kind of mysterious as to how, like, what's actually going on behind the scenes in the brain. But the idea behind child-directed speech is that there is something within all of us that's like, okay, this small thing doesn't get it, so I gotta change it up a little bit so that they might get it a little bit better. And that's ultimately why, like, saying Motherese is like a good layperson term, but like you were saying, this crosses genders, this crosses age gaps. Like that's why we call it child directed speech instead, is because it's not limited just to mothers. Because this type of speech is found with like all people. And this child directed speech, like I kind of mentioned before, can also extend to things like animals or objects or whatever it is you think might need a little bit more understanding or doesn't quite get human language yet.
Right, definitely. And I think it's interesting too that a lot of these things that might be helpful for small children or that we do in trying to speak to small children are really annoying to adults.
I mean, especially when like the child directed speech is directed at you, right? Like if
Well, then
you're an
that's just
adult,
infantilizing. Like that's just
yeah,
offensive and
yeah,
insulting and downright.
exactly. Well,
But
yes, that like baby talk kind of a thing is like it can rub people the wrong way for sure.
yeah, 100%. 100%. But I think there's also extremes that you
Of
can take
course,
it that are not even going to be helpful for the child. Like
of
I
course.
one of the things that is normal with Motherese is to, I'm not going to say dumb down the language, but to use shorter words, simpler words instead
Simpler
of
words,
perhaps
shorter
more
sentences
precise.
too. Yeah.
Right. So you might have a more precise scientific variant, a way of saying something, but instead you'll do something very, very shortcut,
Yeah.
which I just use as an adjective, but don't worry about it.
I mean, I feel like that's fun. Hey, that's chill in my grammar. So
Exactly. Exactly. We're not copywriters or editors. We're
no,
linguists. So
no,
it's
we're
all free
linguists.
game. It's
Yeah,
all
we're
free game.
descriptivists here. Prescriptivists, get your butts out of here. I'm kidding. We love you. We need you. It's fine. Okay. Anyway.
Anyway, I
Anyway.
totally forgot what I was even talking about there.
Oh, the like extremes to the
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, like, where it's normal to maybe raise the pitch of what you're saying, people go to extremes and like raise it a ton. Or maybe a child actually would understand if you used some of the bigger words that they're hearing around the house, but you're just like dumbing it down so much that
Mm-hmm.
it could actually, maybe your child could do more if you were to feed them more, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
I think now I couldn't quote a study right off the top of my head, but I think they like looked into this to see, because like we mentioned, this is relatively universal, but there are some cultures that don't have child directed speech, or at least in certain like obvious ways, right? And I think there was a comparative study done about like the development of children's language, and child directed speech does help their development, but not having child directed speech doesn't inherently hurt a child either, right? Like by allowing them access to natural normal conversations that are unfiltered or not specifically directed at a child, they're still going to learn language. And so in either extreme, whether you do it or not, and to which extreme you do it or not, if your kid is, I hate to say it, I'm putting air quotes, developmentally normal, again, big fat air quotes, because it's all going to be kind of different and relative. But most children will get it in the end, whether you do
Mm-hmm.
the child directed speech or not. So it's not like the discussion on bilingualism where, is this going to impact like my child overall or like their development or their social life? Like, no, this is like child directed speech is, from what scientists have found, just like a really interesting way that we change our voice to adapt to children, right? It's not inherently positive, it's not inherently negative. Again, it's another aspect of language. I say it all the time and I'll say it one more time. It's a tool that we use to kind of connect with the child more, to maybe help their perception a little bit along the way.
Yeah.
And if we're using child directed speech outside of communicating with a child, it can imply a bunch of other stuff. So we use
Right.
it for even larger context and pragmatic reasons.
Yeah, I would really like to know more about, what you've heard about languages, like which languages don't use child-directed speech the way we're thinking about it, because I haven't ever heard of that personally, and I think that'd be really interesting to know more about.
Yeah, I do not want to like misquote anything or, put out false information out there. So I can't say confidently which cultures don't use child-directed language. But, there are some native groups that don't necessarily do it. I've heard of like groups in like Asia that don't do it. I hate, like, I can't pull it right out of my butt this minute. But I think
Okay,
EJ is
yeah,
Googling it presently.
I am Googling it presently. So I just pulled
She
up
does
the
a Goog.
Wikipedia. Yeah, I'm that person. I
Yes,
just pulled up the Wikipedia article on baby talk, is what the Wikipedia article is called, which I
fair
guess
enough.
is, yeah, it doesn't have the same problems that Motherese has as a title of what you were saying of like
Right, and it
it
doesn't
can be
sound
from anyone.
as cold as child-directed speech.
Right, it's a little bit shorter. I like it. I like it.
Baby
Anyway,
talk.
what it says is that researchers Bryant and Barrett in 2007 suggested that child-directed language exists universally across all cultures and is a species-specific adaptation, but other researchers contend that it is not universal among the world's cultures and argue that its role in helping children learn grammar has been overestimated, pointing out that in some societies, such as certain Samoan tribes, adults do not speak to their children at all until the children reach a certain age. Furthermore, even where baby talk is used, it has many complicated grammatical constructions and mispronounced or non-standard words. That's really interesting. And then it
Yeah,
also says other evidence that it's not a universal phenomenon comes from the Kaluli tribe of Papua New Guinea, who do not
yeah. I was
typically
gonna say, like, New
employ
Guinea is a
it.
real hotspot for some cool linguistic shit.
And there's a study by Schieffelin and Oaks in 1983 that
I
talks
feel like I've
about that.
read that one before. Yeah, I
So
feel like
yeah,
I've
that'd
read
be
that one before.
fascinating. I'm gonna look further into that. But yeah,
Hmm.
those are a couple really interesting
Yeah, I
notes. So
mean,
it might not be universal,
it might not be
but
universal.
I would say it's almost universal if it's not.
Yeah, nearly. It's like nearly universal. And like it kind of just comes down to how does a culture treat relationships with children, right?
Right.
Like in some Native American indigenous groups, like back in the day, they had their children like on their backs like all the time. And they were just like there. They were like on baby boards. And I think they do this in Africa too, where the child is just like on your back while you're working, while you're doing stuff. So you're not like always engaging with the child directly. So that
Yeah.
child isn't necessarily getting that like I am communicating with you kind of speech. Again, they're still going to pick it up. So, yeah, it is a bit, it's almost like I hate to say it, but it's kind of a fascinating modern development. And it's like depending on how your culture has kind of like valued children or seen the relationships with children, whether or not you'll have that child directed speech will kind of pop up here and there. So I'm sure it's kind of shifted over time, but these days I feel like as we're valuing children more and we're seeing children as like people just in small bodies, we are kind of like saying like, okay, hey, like we can direct more language at you because we're kind of perceiving you to just be like small versions of big people.
Right. I do want to caveat that a little bit. Like that's a very broad
It is.
generalization and
It is.
theory.
It is. It is. I like it is very, very broad. And like the whole idea of like there's a specific word for it that's been going around on TikTok about treating children as if they're like grown-ups in small bodies. There's like a specific word for it, and it is kind of like a very new movement. So I'm like, this is not to generalize across like
Right. So
all
you're
cultures, not even
talking
all of
about like
American
one
culture.
specific perception, but there's
Yeah.
always cultures that do things differently. Like
Yes.
I would I would posit that for millennia, we've like I don't think that child-directed speech is a new thing at all. Like
Oh
I
yeah,
would guess that it's
no.
existed almost as long as language itself. Like we can make theories and stuff around this, and that's one that we're like, it's not possible to research whether or not child-directed speech
Yeah,
existed
because I
millennia ago.
mean, think about just like how far back the written word went, right? And what were
Mm.
they initially writing down with the written word? They were writing down like how much grain we have, how many cows are the cows male, are they female? We're not going to be like looking for there's not children's books in ancient Sumerian. And I've got a
Oh,
friend who knows about that shit. I could ask her, but I'm positive there's probably not any like bedtime stories specifically for bebes.
at least not that have survived. I mean, there
Yeah.
might have been because those kind of fairy tales, children's stories have exist forever as well. But yeah, I'm not aware of any. Like, that's a really interesting question. What is the oldest known children's book? Because, like, you can't say that something doesn't exist because of the lack of evidence, right? Because there's all sorts
That's
of
true.
reasons that things don't
That's true.
survive.
I mean, I'm sure we've had, like oral history dates back to before we even, like, we don't even know when oral history started, right? We don't know exactly when humans first started, like, communicating, at least like verbally. So we're like not sure. So, but there's definitely been stories throughout all time. Stories have always been told to entertain or to warn or to teach morality or whatever.
Yeah.
So stories have always been told. It would just be interesting to see if they've been documented and specifically like how they were documented because, right, like you can have a fairy tale, you can have like classic Cinderella fairy tale, but have it written in adult language. But that's very different from Jack and Jill went up a hill to fetch a pail of water, right?
Right. Well, and what would be really interesting if we had, thousands and thousands year old children's book is that then you could analyze how those children books were written and how they're written differently from modern books. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not
Could be
aware of any
cool.
at the moment, but that would
Yeah, I mean,
be
me
that would
neither,
be really
but
cool to look
it
into.
would be really interesting. It'd be really interesting. But I mean, just like all linguistic patterns, they will ebb and flow and they will
Mm.
change. And cultural patterns will also ebb and flow and change. Everything kind of works cyclically in nature and in humanity. And so I have no doubt that in many cultures, probably even in Samoa and Papua New Guinea, there have probably been instances of, a rise in popularity in child directed speech.
Well, and there's always people that don't follow the norm. Like I've
Yeah.
been told by so many people, this is the right way to raise your baby. And there's times
Oh,
when I'm like, no, I'm going to do what I think is right. And it is not that thing. So even in places where where this doesn't exist, it might exist,
right.
just not in a way that we've
Yeah.
recognized
In
it or
a more
documented it.
covert, not necessarily mainstream way.
I think that does raise some interesting questions, though, for me. Like some of these patterns that exist are patterns that once people recognize them, they gain a little bit of a stigma and people try to avoid them. And I think Motherese falls into this category, the same as like replacing T's in the middle of the words with glottal stops, like in the case of mountain. Like I know
Mm.
people who very deliberately go out of their way knowing that they call it a Utah thing or this thing. Like it's a very broad, like
Yes.
dialectal thing,
Yeah,
but
it's a
they're like,
very
oh, this
natural
is inaccurate.
thing.
And therefore we're going to deliberately do what is unnatural for
Mm-hmm.
us and
Mm-hmm.
say mountain, even though I grew up in Utah around everybody saying mountain because I don't want to be like them. And
Right.
like this, like just as an example, and I think I've
Yes.
heard and seen people doing the same thing with Motherese, being like, oh my gosh, that's obnoxious, I don't want to do that, I'm not going to
Yep.
do that, and
Yep.
trying not to. And with Motherese specifically, when people try not to, they still end up doing it, which is really,
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah.
But it raises questions of like, what are people deliberately doing versus unconsciously doing in order to try to better spread language to their children? And
Yeah.
there's several things that fall into that category. Like we were just talking about, I was reading some books to my kid, and like reading books is something that people do for a lot of different reasons, but one of those is to try and give more linguistic exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I've seen with my son, the daycare that we take him to actually started teaching him sign language.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I've been seeing that incorporated a lot more
Mm-hmm.
as sort of like a like it's I've heard that it's helpful for like neurodivergent kids
Mm.
and sort of like bridging gaps between those who may be like neurodivergent or disabled somehow and
But they actually do it for everyone. And the
yeah.
thing is that before you gain the ability to articulate and manipulate your tongue in order to make these finite sounds, a child can make the motions with their arms before they get
Yeah.
the motor control to be able to
Yes.
do that in their mouth. And so,
Yeah. Because the motor control in your mouth is extremely fine.
mhm.
Like people forget like how finely tuned our motor control in our face holes are. Like it's insane, my guys. You shift your tongue by like a millimeter and all of a sudden you got a different sound. It's
Right.
insane.
Yeah. So at home, we were just speaking to my son in English and then a little bit of the other languages that my husband and I speak as well. And we like had heard about doing that. And I didn't
Mhm.
know that the daycare was doing that. But then one day my son came home and he was clearly making a very deliberate motion with his hands that was clearly trying to communicate something. And so I was able to make a few guesses and look it up. And my son's
Mhm.
first word was actually the sign for more. And then
Yeah.
I went into the daycare and I was like, so this is really cool. What other signs have you been teaching him? Like, what can we be using at home that I didn't know that my child could already communicate?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised they didn't tell you.
It was a
I
great
feel like that
surprise
would be good to know
because he was
as
able
a
to
parent.
make a few signs well before he hit the stage where children normally start being able to actually speak.
Mhm.
And that like you
Mhm.
would be amazed how useful it is to have a child just be able to say more. Like
Yeah.
that one word is so useful.
Yes. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really great and like I think what's wonderful about where we're at scientifically and socially is that we're able to see instances like this and we're like this is good. This is stuff that we can test and we can like look into and be like okay yeah no it like this isn't like a fault, this isn't something like a misfire or whatever. Like this is a good way to start early communication between like adults and children in ways that are like useful for both parties, right?
Mhm.
So this is like a really cool development that I mean, socially, I hope it kind of it's definitely grown quite a bit more since it first like came about. Like it's only happened within the past like 10 years that I've even heard of people doing this. But like it's really cool to see that we can take some of the findings that us linguists look into and put them into practice and that can benefit people in their homes and parents and kids and allow that communication really early on to potentially develop better relationships and take care of needs better and make humanity a better place in the end. Hopefully, maybe. I don't know. That's a bit of a stretch.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of, things that might be helpful and I'm sure there's a ton of studies happening right now on this
Hmm.
exact topic, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's definitely just a really, really interesting thing to think about. And, hopefully there's some tidbits there that are new and interesting for whoever's listening.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And we definitely are going to circle back on to like people's perceptions of different language terms, the use of vocal fry and child directed speech and all these other things. We'll circle back to that and we can talk about some of the social consequences of that in another episode because I think that would be very nice. If you are a parent of a child and people are making fun of you for your child directed speech, you can give them the middle finger because
It's
like
everywhere.
it's
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 natural. It
everywhere.
might
It's
actually help your
fine.
child.
Yeah, and they can suck it, like you do you, boo. You do you.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's a lot of ways to be a good parent. There's also a lot of ways
Hmm.
to like objectively be a bad parent, but there's a lot of
Yes.
ways to be a good parent and to take care of your
Yes.
kid. So, as long as
Yep.
you are loving them, providing language exposure, doing what you can for them, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So rock on. Whether you raise your pitch and simplify your verbs, or if you just go balls to the walls on the Oxford Dictionary on your child, it'll work out in the end. I promise. One way or another.
All right. Well, let's call it there on Motherese or child-directed language or baby talk, whatever you
Baby
want to
talk.
call it.
I love how we just took the polar opposites and we totally missed the most obvious word for it, which is baby talk.
Thank you, Wikipedia, for helping us out.
We are capable adults. Anyway, you can follow us at For the Love of Language on Instagram, where we will give you updates about upcoming releases of episodes. And feel free to hit us up with any topics or questions you might have that we can address in the pod. We love hearing from our viewers. Thank you guys. You're fucking awesome.
All right, till next time.
Bye.